In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, may the peace of God be upon you all. We would like to welcome you all to this meeting, to this public lecture, which is about gene alteration, particularly with regard to children, and its relationship with a number of constant concepts with regard to the alteration of God's creation. And we would like to start with an introduction about the topic of this lecture, the alteration of genes. And after that, we're going to give the floor to Dr. Samer Rashwani, who is going to present a lecture about the concept of the alteration of God's creation in the Quran. And after that, I'm going to talk about genetic intervention or genetic alteration as per the discussions undertaken by the jurists. And after that, we're going to have a lecture by Dr. Mu'taz Al-Khatib, who is going to look into this matter from different angles and perspectives. And I wish everybody success, and I would like to talk about the concept of the body from treatment of the body into alteration of the organs and the body, whether we look at it from a moral perspective or scientific and medical perspectives. At the beginning, I would like to say that this is the first public lecture which is part of the Master of Arts in Applied Islamic Ethics that had been established at at the College of Islamic Studies about applied Islamic ethics. So we are very happy to convene this event, and we look forward to convening more and more events. First, I would like to thank the Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics that helped us promote for this lecture and this event. We have had our colleagues who have organized this meeting. This is the center where we carry out research about such topics, modern issues, and also the relationship with our Islamic heritage. And this lecture is linked to a research that is being carried out currently, which is about genome and Islamic ethics and communication with the public in general. I would like to say very quickly that the concepts that men had about body is that it includes organs, main organs, and secondary organs, and this is what is called phenotypes. And then I would like to talk about the transition that took place, and after that we started studying genomes or genotypes. We're talking about very important incidents that took place in 1953, 2012, and conclude with 2018. And the topic of our discussion today. As we can see, these are pictures, delineations of the human body, as we can see them in old medical books. And this delineates the different organs of the body as we see them today. In the 13th century, Ibn Nafis was able to come up with a breakthrough, and he was able, through a number of queries, questionings, and guessing, and after that, Ibn Nafis talked about a number of things such as blood circulation, and this was a great deal of development that was witnessed at the time. And we are still looking at the superficial dimension of the body, and we might go deeper and try to penetrate the different parts of the body. So there are a number of organs, external organs that can be seen. And in mid 20th century, we have this article that was published in April 1953 by James Watson and Francis Crick. This article is a two-page article only, but it is a very important article in which they talked about the makeup of the DNA and the genetic makeup of human beings. And after 10 years, Maurice Wilkins, a British New Zealander, in addition to the two scholars, they got the Nobel Prize due to the discoveries that have been made. So now, after that phase, we started looking into the human body as a series of letters. We started with what is called sequencing, and we looked at the body, we started looking at the body in a different way. And we have had what is called a knowledge, scientific knowledge explosion. And this was the result of our conceptualization of the human body, which is a makeup, which is made up of genes and genomics. We wanted to understand who we are and how we are formed and structured. And in 2012, we had another article by Dr. Dowden and Dr. Charpentier, a French scientist. Both scientists talked about the possibility of carrying out editing or alteration. We can change and alter these genes, and this has opened the scope. And these two scientists were able to get a very important prize, and we do not know whether they're going to get the Nobel Prize or not. And after they were able to come up with this discovery, which is the alteration of genetics, this is still under discussion and also being studied. And in November 2018, we had a Chinese scientist who presented to us twins that he was able to alter the genetics of those two Chinese twins through chemical scissors. This incident led into a lot of controversy in the world, and there is another Russian scientist who is about to announce the birth of another child who is going to be born as a result of genetic alteration through the use of chemical scissors. So this was the beginning of the discussion that took place when we had this conference that took place in Hong Kong a day after the story was announced by Reuters. So this is a picture that I took with my own phone because I attended the conference. Since then, the discussions started, and we do not know when these discussions are going to end. So this is the question that is being posed. So all the discussions, all the alterations, all the editing that took place, is this equal to what used to happen when it comes to organs? Is this no difference when we talk about internal and external organs? Is this to do with the alteration of the creation of God and other philosophical and moral principles that we're going to talk about? We're going to start with the presentation that is going to be made by Dr. Samer Rashwani. And we're going to start with the concept of the alteration of the creation of God in the Holy Quran. And after that, we're going to talk about other concepts such as genetic alteration in Islam. So the floor is yours, Dr. Samir Rashwani.
Peace be upon you all. Thank you immensely to Dr. Muhammad and to Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics for their blessed call for me to participate in this lecture. The question that my lecture aims to tackle is, what is the meaning of the two phrases which came in the Quran, which is the alteration of the creation of Allah and the change of the creation of Allah? How did the interpreters understand those two ayahs linked to this topic, and do they show that man can behave with his body and the creation of Allah, which is the subject of our topic? Is this something of an original evidence or something sequential? So my topic will not get into the complicated issues mentioned by Dr. Muhammad. In Quran, we have two verses that are cited in the context of jurisprudence discourse, and many times the citation of this as changing the creation of Allah. So the question now is, do these two verses have any relationship to this topic or no? Let us look at the exegesis of those two verses. Those two ayahs are from Rum and from An-Nisa, ayah 119. From Surah or chapter of Rum, the verse is, which is number 30, then turn your face upward and upright to the religion, and this is the upright religion, but most people do not know.
اشتهر
It was popular when this verse is read, the hadith in Al-Bukhari, that no newborn, but is born according to the natural disposition, but it's the parents who make him a Christian or a Magian or a Jew, just like an animal gives birth to an animal. And then Abu Huraira speaks that this is the creation of Allah, and there is no alteration of the creation of Allah. So there was a difference between the interpreters, which came in different meanings. The main meaning for the interpreters is interpreting it with the moral meaning. So the khalq of Allah is that the religion of Allah, the faith of Allah, it's eternal and there's no change to it. The other meaning is the fitratullah. Fitratullah here does not accept alteration or change, which is the predisposition of man according to the creation of Allah. So this la or no means negative, but others said it is to stop them from doing that. They said we can take it as you should not change it, or it is never to be changed. How did they explain this change of fitra or predisposition or the natural state of creation? They said it is the ability of the creation of man who is able to look into the creation of Allah and extrapolate from that evidence of the existence of God or Allah. Imam al-Maturidi explained this ayah or verse that there is no alteration in the meaning of the creation of Allah, that the evidence of the creation of Allah and His monotheistic nature is never to be changed. Philosophical and rational meanings of the creation are not to be changed. The fourth interpretation is that there لا تبديل لخلق الله, meaning there is no change of the way Allah created mankind, which is they are subservient slaves to Allah as they are slaves with their choice and free will. Also, the other one is that there should not be castration of male animals, and the most of scholars took this verse with the clear meaning. Allah has given you an example from amongst yourselves. Do you have from amongst your slaves partners, and thus you both become equal? You fear them.
السياق هو سياق حديث عن الشرك.
So here we are speaking about polytheism, and the example or the parable given to us by Allah belongs to natural life and the natural disposition, that a man who is a master does not accept the slave to have same authority over his own properties, and as such is also Allah, the owner of dominion. He cannot accept for partners to be associated with him in terms of being glorified and worshipped. So here we are speaking about the evidence which does not accept change. لا تبديل لخلق الله. There is no change to this predisposition and natural state of creation of Allah.
هذا فيما يخص هذه الآية.
Now, this verse is the less controversial one. The second one, which is in An-Nisa, I will place it here.
هذه الآية
This verse starts in its context speaking about polytheism. Allah does not forgive that there should be any partners with Him, and forgives anything less than that to whomever He wills. And whoever associates partners with Allah has been misled greatly. They call besides Allah nothing but females and a rebellious devil or Satan. Here we will move to another issue, which is the scene of dialogue between Iblis, Satan, and Allah after he rejected the prostration to Adam. This Satan has been cursed by Allah, and he said, I will take a certain amount of power over your slaves, and I will mislead them, and I will arouse in them sinful desires, and I will command them so that they will change and alter the creation of Allah, and they will slit the ears of the animals and cattle, and whoever takes Satan as an ally instead of Allah has certainly sustained a clear loss. So he said in chapter Ash-Shu'ara that he wants to control man and have authority over him. Part of this is that he will command mankind to slit the ears of cattle. So this refers us to the verse of Surah Al-Ma'idah, chapter Al-Ma'idah, and to the customs of the time of ignorance. We will refer to this later, but here is, he says, I will command them so that they will alter the creation of Allah. So the alteration of the creation of Allah is a command coming to mankind by Satan or Shaitan or the devil. But what is meant by that here? There are two meanings, taking it with the meaning that the alteration of the creation of Allah is that He will command them to change the religion of Allah, and based on that, many companions followed this interpretation, and many earlier exegetes such as Ibn Abbas, Ikrimah, Mujahid, As-Suddi, Muqatil bin Sulaiman, Sufyan al-Thawri, etc., and others. But at the same time, there was another interpretation which was narrated by some companions and followers of that time, which is the change dealing with the material behavior and physical behavior of the body, whether it is for an animal or mankind. And some said that it's the castration of the male animals or to castrate the male human beings. And Al-Hasan al-Basri said that it is the tattoo and the bleaching of the face. At-Tabari in the 4th century combined both. And he said there is no contradiction between them both. However, the main interpretation is that changing the religion of Allah, and that is congruent with the context, because here we are speaking about polytheism, and then I will command them so that they will change their religion. But he said the religion of Allah includes instructions and commands linked to the human body and what he has right to do over it and what he has no right to do with it. Thus, castration of animals or tattoos, etc., of such things are included in the realm of changing the religion of Allah, so that they are unlawful as a result and not in clear terms that are mentioned. In this context, Al-Maturidi said, to comment on this issue, to clarify the context, Al-Maturidi also supported the idea that changing the creation of Allah means changing the religion of Allah. Khalqillah is the, and he commented on those who said it's tattooing or castration of male animals. He said it is not possible that it dawned on the mind of Satan then that Allah, or that he wanted by that the castration or the tattoos, etc. But he said that when he asked his Lord to give him respite till the day of resurrection, and it is not possible that he has knowledge that this is unlawful. And then he said it could be possible that Sharia or the Islamic law will come up with something similar after that, meaning that those provisions and rules mentioned, such as the bleaching and castration and tattooing, etc., that some legislations will say that they are okay to do. So the issue is linked originally with the religion of Allah and the legislation of Allah, and not with those material and physical behaviors. So, here we're speaking about the changing of the religion of Allah and what is included in terms of rules dealing with the body of the human being. What is the tabdeel or taghyir that is subject of controversy here? The interpretations differ here. Ibn Atiyah, for example, said that the prohibition or the change here is the harmful change. He spoke about what is beneficial and what is harmful. So what is harmful is under the banner of this do not do, and the other one is under the do. Raghib al-Asfahani gave a wider perspective, which is linked to changing the objectives of the creation and what they were created for. He said, in the verse is a signal that everything that Allah has made perfect by its original creation, and man made it imperfect because of mismanagement, and that is, mankind is created in a perfect way, and Allah has made him a candidate to purify himself or to desecrate himself. So So anyone that is a matter of virtue and mankind uses it in a sinful way, then he has changed the objective of the creation and the religion. And under this general banner, everything that is unlawful and man-made lawful, and the same thing is relevant to castration, etc. Al-Biqai viewed those verses in a more general context. He tried to combine the other verses with similar context to the deeds that Arabs at the time of Al-Jahiliyyah used to do, such as slitting the ears of the cattle, and Bahira, and Sa'iba, and Ham, etc. This verse, according to Al-Biqai, who was an interpreter concerned and interested in the ayat, he said that this ayah is a signal to what the people of the Jahiliyyah made unlawful, that is to come close to awthan, such as Sa'iba and Bahira, of what they have already taken as a religion or as a way of life. Meaning, Allah did not make Bahira or Sa'iba. This is an ayah. Wala wasila, nor, but the disbelievers fabricate lies against Allah, and most of them do not know. The Arabs in Al-Jahiliyyah would get used to certain types of cattle. For example, when a camel gives birth to 5 or 10, then they would leave it and abandon killing it. Some they slit its ears or brand it, and they leave it to the idols, and they do not eat it. And when they die by themselves, men eat it without women. And these are acts of change in the creation of Allah, because those cattle were created for the benefit of mankind, yet they made it subject to worship. So the change was of a religious nature. They have taken this change as a religion for themselves.
البيضاوي
Al-Baydawi comes with a definition that combines all these things and add more. He says, فَلَيُغَيِّرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ. That means they will change the face and the attribution characteristics, and that includes poking the eyes and tattooing, homosexuality, and worshipping the sun and the moon, and changing fitrah of Allah, which is Islam, the religion of Allah. And then he went on saying, and using organs to something that brings imperfection to the human being. So the issue now is bigger than the mere creation of organs, but it's linked to a moral or ethical position towards the universe or the abilities bestowed on mankind by Allah.
3 دقائق. طبعا الأوسع من
And some spoke in more details and clarification by Tahir bin Ashur, who commented on this issue and clarified that the context of those verses are linked intrinsically with the Arabs' habits and their polytheism at the time of ignorance, and Islam combating this polytheism. So changing the creation, the khalq of Allah, is linked to the fact that if the motivation, if it's evil and of a devilish type, then it is dangerous, but it is not linked to an evil purpose, then that's something else that should be looked at and researched in a different place. So briefly said, the interpreters, whether those who spoke about the moral or the physical evidence, both have noticed the context, and those who said it's moral, they spoke about polytheism, so the issue is relevant to religion. And those who said the changing of the physical body, they said that this means the slitting of the ears of the cattle. But there is a general observation that none of them has studied the meaning of khalq Allah, or the creation of Allah in the Quran. Clearly, they focused on creation of mankind and animals, but the creation of Allah is understood in the Quran to include beyond that vegetations, trees, and things. For example, can we change the creation of Allah, for example, to change the path of a river? Can we destroy a mountain? Can we change a valley? So that gives us an idea about the meanings of change, تغيير and تسخير. What are the guidelines between تغيير, which is change, and تسخير, or making subservient? So this topic has not been discussed sufficiently, and I think research on this issue would help shed some light on resolving this controversial issue which has been discussed of late. So, in conclusion, the understanding of تغيير خلق الله as understood by most interpreters is not linked intrinsically with our topic today. So we cannot use it as evidence or an argument to say that these changes are unlawful or haram because it's changing the creation of Allah. This is not the right way. We need independent evidence extrapolated from the Sharia and its philosophy. We need independent evidence more to say if this intervention is legitimate or not. If we reach a conclusion that it is illegitimate, then we say it can be included under the banner of changing the khalq Allah, because it is the creation of Allah and the way of the faith of Allah, and not the confinement to the human body or the bodies of creatures. There is a study that was thoroughly done by Dr. Abdurrahman al-Hilali, which will be issued in the upcoming volume of Islamic ethics, which is a thorough study that looks in depth into this issue by interpreters, and all praises due to Allah, Lord of the worlds. Allah knows best.
فقط
I would like to bring to your attention that my intervention is going to be in English, so whoever wants to listen to the interpretation can use the headsets to do so.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So I'll speak about the question of editing human genomes or human genes as parts of the genome, as addressed by in the fiqh councils. We have a number of institutions since the beginning of the 1980s. We have a number of institutions that have addressed bioethical questions from an interdisciplinary perspective. So especially they would bring together religious scholars on one hand, most of them jurists, but religious scholars on one hand, and biomedical scientists and physicians on one hand, so that they address the topic from both perspectives, the medical and scientific one, the biomedical one, and the religious one. So we have three main institutions that have been working on this since the 1980s. One is the Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences in Kuwait, and the Islamic Fiqh Academy, Majmu' al-Fiqh al-Islami in Mecca, and the International Islamic Fiqh Academy in Jeddah. These three institutions have discussed the issues related to genetics and genomics. Of course, besides these three, we have many other meetings organized by other institutions, but these are the most important three ones. From 1993, and 1993, this was just 3 years after the starting of the big project, Human Genome Project, in the US in collaboration with many countries in the world. So both religious scholars and biomedical scientists, just after 3 years after launching this big project, they wanted to discuss this issue from an Islamic perspective. For instance, should we be part of this coming genetic and genomic revolution? Should we better wait without investing in this, etc.? Till 2013, when we have a very important resolution from the International Islamic Fiqh Academy, supported, of course, by previous resolutions, saying that joining the genomic revolution is not an option. From an Islamic perspective, it is part of the collective duties of the Muslim Ummah at the moment. Fard kifaya, that people should be part of this. This is the earliest one, to the best of my knowledge, in 1993, and this was a conference held here in Qatar by the Faculty of Science at this time. At Qatar University, ethical implications of modern researches in genetics. After this, we have a number of other meetings and conferences and seminars like these ones from the Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences. The question of editing the gene in particular, was not the topic of the main topic of one of these meetings. It was discussed as a side issue or as a related issue throughout the 13 years, the 20 years from 1993 till 2013. As a side issue, because they started in 1993, and at this time we were busy with reading the genome, not editing it. As I mentioned, the editing became a big issue when the CRISPR-Cas9, this chemical scissor, was discovered by the American and the French scientists. So it was much earlier, it was much more hypothetical than something else. But what I will speak about today in my talk is what they said, the perspectives they developed related to the editing the genome and editing human genes. Although maybe if they wrote distinct papers or they made a conference now, they may think differently about what they said. But I am communicating the discussions that happened there. So I am not only speaking about papers that they have written, but I'm speaking about the script of oral discussions between these biomedical scientists and the religious scholars, and sometimes even reading what was between the lines. Generally speaking, they have touched upon a number of principles related to the question of editing genomes. One of them, for instance, is human dignity, respect for human dignity, karamat al-insan. So, for instance, if editing human genes or the human genome in general would expose the human being into unnecessary risk or too risky experiments, it shouldn't be done. Why? Because human dignity is at the top of the dignity of God's creatures. So we have to test this on other creatures, etc. So there must be safety, there must be efficacy. Another point related to human dignity is that people should give their informed consent. So if you want to do these things on the humans, they have to give their consent. They have to give their permission based on sufficient information they came to know about what you are going to do on them. Here comes the issue of children. Are children in a position to give their consent? Most of the religious scholars would say if they are not adults, baligh, aqil, etc., they are not mukallaf, they cannot give their consent. Maybe you can get their assent, that they do not object to that. But you need permission or consent from the guardian, from the parents, for instance. So this is an issue. Why would we have to do that? Because of the principle of human dignity. Another one, lineage, nasab. If we are going to take some parts of the gene and replace them, of the genome, and replacing them with other parts of the gene, if this replacement would affect the DNA structure, the genetic makeup, we have to make sure that the genetic makeup of the child is not coming from a third party other than the married couple. This is another issue. Another one is treatment. Is editing gene an issue of treatment? Is it like treating the organs that we used to have in medicine or not? And parental authority, al-wilaya, how far or how wide the scope of parents' authority to give a consent about unborn child. Because there are some things and some forms of gene editing that I do in my body but will affect my generations, my offspring, my children, my grandchildren, grandchildren, and so on. So can I give my consent to all these generations which did not exist before? These are a number of principles. But generally speaking, to give a systematic overview of the discussions, two main questions should be answered, and the way we answer each of these questions will determine the position of these religious scholars and biomedical scientists. One of them, what are we editing? Because not all genes are the same, not all cells are the same. So we have what we call somatic cells, like for instance my skin cells, my hair cells, my kidney cells, etc. These are all cells which are living in my body, but I will not give them to my children. So this is my own issue. But most of the religious scholars, they said this type of genes in these cells, they are like organs. What you can do with the organs, you can do with the organs in these cells, you can do them with the genes in the same cells. Some of them didn't even think about these differences. Some of them thought about the differences and they said that it's not a big deal. The differences will not have impact on the religious rulings. It will not affect the illah, the effective cause in the religious ruling. The other thing which made them more permissive about this type of gene editing in the genes in the somatic cells is that it has limited scope of impact. It will affect my body only as an individual. And I have authority over my body, if not as an owner of my body like the secular perspective, then at least I have authority in my capacity as a trustee, mu'taman, from God, the owner, with the uppercase O, that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if we are editing germline cells, so cells like for instance in the sperms, or in the male sperms, or in the female eggs, these are reproductive cells which carry the genetic structure that will go to the children later on. If we are editing genes in these cells, it's different. Because it will not affect my body only, but it will affect all my forthcoming offspring. So here they raised questions. The first one is that how far the human can interfere, not only in his or her body, but the bodies of generations to come. Am I in a position to decide about that? Or I can only decide about my body and let the rest for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to decide. The second thing is the impact of offspring, as I said, and the authority over one's body, the concept of wilaya, etc. Some religious scholars were inclined to say, if parents can decide about the education of their children, more importantly, the religion of their children, that they will become Muslims or non-Muslims, why not about their cells and genes, even in the reproductive cells? The issue of religion, education, bringing up tarbiyah, deen, etc., they are much more important than health even. Others, they were very cautious about that. The other one is about the lineage, as I said. In editing the genes, sometimes it's by replacing. We take a gene or more, and we replace them with another. So the mutated gene, we will take it, and then we will replace it with a healthy, good functioning one. they would ask, where does it come from, this part? Is it coming from the married couple who will be the parents, or is it coming from outside? If it's coming from outside, then they make this analogy with the IVF, in vitro fertilization, and they would say, if we prohibit contribution from a third party, so no donated sperm, no donated egg, no donated uterus, so here also we have to say no donated gene. It shouldn't come from someone outside the couple. In some discussions with scientists, and we have some of the prominent scientists here among us, they said that it's an irrelevant question because we speak about chemicals. We code them with ATCG. These chemicals, we can even develop them in the lab. So we are not speaking about donating like we donate sperm or egg. It's something completely different. But anyhow, this is one of the questions that have been asked. But generally speaking, we see more inclination from religious scholars and biomedical scientists who participated in these discussions. If we speak about somatic cells, then yes. If we speak about germline cells, you will have much less people who are ready to tolerate this type of gene editing. The other big question is why? Why are we doing that? If we are doing that to treat a disease, so we have a disease and we are treating it, then it will fall under the concept of treatment tadawi. And the minimum ruling of tadawi is permissible, that we can do it. So if we say treating organ is permissible, then treating mutated gene is also permissible, if not higher, if not recommended, and if not obligatory. But some of them said, because this type of treatment is so special, because it's new, we don't have so much certainty about the results, we can have what we call off-target impacts. The human genome is a huge thing in the body. We have billions of letters of ACTGs. So touching one part may affect another part. So we may work on some cells in the brain, they will affect cells in the heart, etc. So we don't know the impact of our work, where it will remain, only in the part I'm working on or in other parts. Because of these issues, they would say only in a case of necessity, when we don't have an alternative, a traditional treatment. If we have traditional treatment which has been tested and proved safe, then we use it and we don't go to the gene editing. But gene editing is not only about treatment. It's also about enhancement. Now, in the modern bioethical discourse, there are many questions if we can draw this line between what is treatment and what is enhancement. But in the perception of the participants in these discussions, they drew this line. And they said, treatment is what we used to do throughout history. I go to a physician because I'm sick. What this physician is doing to me is treatment. So I don't go to a physician because I want to run as fast as the world champion. I don't go to a physician for that. If I'm doing that, this is enhancement. I don't go to a physician because I have difficulty to memorize the Quran in 1 week. This doesn't show that I'm sick. So if I want to do that, this is enhancement. Examples like that. But there are, of course, some examples which are extremely difficult, like the case of the Chinese doctor himself. It was very difficult to consider what he did as treatment or enhancement. But anyhow, some of them, they would say this is controversial. Why is this controversial? To my reading is that it was about altering God's creation. We have human nature. This human nature, how far can we interfere in changing, modifying, or between brackets, what we perceive as improving human nature? How far we can do that? Some of the participants in the discussions, they saw human nature as something fixed and perfect as created by God. So God, they would quote Quranic verses like, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. We created people in the best composition, in the best form. So what we have is the best. whatever intervention from the human will put this beast to a lower rank. So we are only putting ourselves much less than the best that God has created us with. Others, they thought, the best here is the potential. We have been created with the potential to be the best. But it is at our hand all the time to try to reach this best. So human nature is not something fixed. It's something which is evolving. It's something which is changeable. God created it so that it can reach the best. How can we reach the best? Through our work. And they said that what we have done with ourselves through education, through reading, so all the mechanisms that we have done, we are not the same that we are before. As humans, we can do much better things than what our forefathers did. Why? Because we worked on our human nature and we improved this human nature. So to sum up, should we edit our children's genomes or our genomes in general? We don't have, from these discussions, a one-size-fits-all approach. We don't have one opinion saying that it is halal, it is haram, or it depends on what are you doing exactly in gene editing. So there are some concepts, some forms, according to at least the dominant majority, that it is acceptable and would be considered ethical. If the what question is about somatic cells, and if the why question is about treatment, the great majority would say, yes, you can do that. Beyond this category, you get into more and more controversies. So for instance, if the what question is about germline cells, we are editing genes in germline cells, even if it is for treatment, some would say no. Why? Because you don't have authority on the bodies of your children, grandchildren, grandchildren, and you are changing the all the generations coming after you. It will become much more problematic and really dark, into a dark area, if the what question is that we are editing genes in germline cells, and we are doing this for enhancement. I want that my children and grandchildren would have the strongest memory ever. So I would edit my the genes in my reproductive organs so that they will be that way. You will find very few among these religious scholars and biomedical scientists in this Islamic ethical discourse that would permit that. This is more or less a very brief summary, a squeezed summary of the discussions that they had. For those who are interested to know more, these are some of the publications that we have done here in the college, in the Research Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics. This is the book Islamic Ethics and the Genome Question. The book is available as open access, so if you Google that, you can just download the PDF from internet for free. Here where you can find the PDF. And this is an article in which I spoke specifically about Islamic ethical perspectives on human genome editing. It is in the Journal of Issues in Science and Technology, the NASA journal. So that's it from my side. Thank you very much for your listening. And now we move to the talk of Dr. Mu'taz al-Khatib.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بدأت يومي.
Assalamu alaikum. I started my day today at 5 a.m. And to speak in one day, 2 lectures is not easy at all. I will try, or based on what we agreed upon, we should speak about the philosophical viewpoint, and it is to be complicated, but I will try to simplify this by answering 2 main questions. First, what is the right or justified behavior ethically? And the second one is, how do we define it? By applying that to the genetic intervention. So the first question is, what is the justified behavior ethically, and how do we define it, and based on what do we identify it? To speak here about this issue, I will speak about three pillars to explain the concept of ethics and morals. And the second one, I will speak briefly because the doctor spoke about the juristic point of view. And the third one is how do we answer this question, which is the genetic intervention or alteration. When we speak about morals nowadays, we speak about something that addresses the human nature's behavior with its complexity, which is endless. And the human being is highly complex in its structure, and with the passage of years and historical developments, it's getting even more complex, especially due to technological advances as well. But we can speak about morals or ethics as answering two questions. The first one, how do we live? Second one is, what do we do? What should we do? The third one is, what are the sources through which we can identify what to do and how to live? Now, when we speak about a righteous deed, al-fa'l al-salih, any righteous deed has two levels, ontological one and epistemological one. Those two try to tackle the issue of who we are and what do we do or what should we do through the ontological concept and the existence. Ilm al-Kalam, theology of Islam, has been preoccupied with two central issues, the human action and the divine action and the relationship between them both. And as such, this human being, is he or she free or not free? And to what extent is he free in his actions, and the relationship between salvation and happiness and causes and effects. This is the concept that we should focus on. The second issue discussed by those theologians is the tasking. Is there a tasking for us, and are we to be held accountable for our deeds or not? The theologians have spoken about this issue, which is linked to beyond or meta morals and ethics, meaning is the moral provision or judgment, is it of a subjective or objective nature, or is it a matter of do and don't? Anything we want to judge today or by a mufti to say halal or haram, forbidden or allowed, based on what? He is trying to know the objective of God or Allah in this deed, the divine objective. This divine will or objective of Allah of this action to be done, will it please Allah or anger Him? And is its existence objective, or is it a subjective issue linked to what to do and what not to do? Not necessarily there should be congruity between do and don't and the goodness and the ugliness of this deed. We have two concepts, which is the Ash'arites and Mu'tazilites. Mu'tazilites said it is something objective that is good. It's good because it's good, and evil is evil because it's evil. So the do's and don'ts doesn't change the issue, but rather the do's and don'ts confirm what exists in the deed itself. Now the Ash'arites, al-Ash'ara, which are the majority of the scholars of Muslims based on the knowledge available to us and the schools of thought available to us, they said no, do's and don'ts is what determine the nature of the divine ruling, because the ruling exists, but the do's and don'ts come and uncover this ruling. This will be reflected on the fatwa, if this is a change of the creation or of Allah or not. But when we say that this action is good or ugly, good or bad or evil, which is the genetic intervention or alteration, is its goodness or ugliness exist in the action itself, or do we need something external to make us know if this is good or evil? All this discussion comes under the banner of what's beyond ethics and manners, meta-morals or ethics, even though the mainstream Islamic knowledge is Ash'arites, but they were able to develop in the objectives of the Sharia to resolve this discrepancy or problem. If I am an Ash'ari and I will try to answer this question, meaning, when I say the genetic intervention is good or evil, with which meaning? Is it to be praised or condemned by Allah? How do I know what is Allah's objective here? So the Ash'arites formed a theory of the objectives of the Sharia in order to justify the rulings and connecting them with reasons and causes and interests that we think fulfill the objectives of Allah, either through the text, going back to the texts, or the special text or the general text, or according to our qiyas or discretion of the jurists to determine if this is an interest or a disinterest. Under general text, they resorted to saying that this is haram because it's alteration and changing the creation of Allah. So they resorted to a general text, but Dr. Osama said, you cannot base your conclusion on that because the text is not based on that. So now the intervention in the genome, before I apply this complexity on the action and to see how the jurists and the muftis tackled with this issue in modern life, and what do I suggest in terms of dealing with this issue. When I speak here, I can distinguish between three terms: the intervention and the improvement, genetization, التجيين, meaning the intervention is general in genome. It could be to improve or for treatment. And the improvement is part of the genetic intervention, because genetic intervention could be for treatment or improvement or enhancement. And geneticization here is the cultural context that looks at the genetic intervention in the social and cultural context, meaning that our view to mankind will change, that he is about a group of genes controlled by a group of components or elements. So the jurisprudence viewpoint here was revolving around the issue of genetic technical intervention, but they did not look at the geneticization, which is another dimension. How did the jurists and muftis deal with this issue? I will try to remind you only with headlines. I said the mufti tries to know the objective of Allah. There's no text, so he resorted to a general text and he was unable to determine that. As a mufti, if I'm a mufti and I'm not a mufti, I should get to know the objective of Allah to judge if this is a good deed or an evil deed, or to determine its weight in the realm of the 5 objectives of the Sharia or Islamic law. If I was an Ash'arite, I will say that the do's and don'ts will reveal the ruling of Allah, because the ruling of Allah comes, but the do's and don'ts reveal the command of Allah. But it doesn't originated. Because the Mu'tazili is the one who says that it is possible the ruling exists and we don't need the text. Even if the text doesn't come, we can do that by our minds. While the Ash'arites, who are the majority of the scholars, should justify this by reason and by fiqh, jurisprudence. So they say there is no general text. In this case, what would the Mufti do to determine the ruling? He will resort to the fact that there is no text that's clear, that's specific. Then he will resort to the fiqh heritage. For Shafi, for example, or if he's Hanafi, will go to the Hanafi school of thought. In modern days, they resort to all four schools of thought, but he will try to find, is there anything similar to judge based on it, a precedent that we can use and apply in the books of fiqh? There isn't. So what does he do in this case? He would resort to the third step, which is general texts in the Sharia. He must find a justification to say halal or haram, allowed or not allowed. This justification will make him resort to general text. So he resorted to the Taghyir Khalqillah, which is general. It could include everything. But resorting to this general text is fragile. It's ineffective and unconvincing. That's why when we speak today about ethics, we speak about justification of morals and ethics. You cannot say that this action are good or evil except based on an answer, why and how did you know that? So you have two questions to answer, why and how did you know that? Now, it is clear that the justifications of the jurists provided through the three organizations previously mentioned, the Islamic Organization for Islamic Sciences and the one in Mecca and the other one, are fragile definitions. All three organizations provide the forbidding of this intervention for improvement, and some of them say it cannot be done except for necessity, such as the Council of Mecca, and it's based on very stringent conditions. But all agree that the improvement or the enhancement intervention is forbidden and banned. So there is no text to reveal the will of Allah, the objective of Allah. Second is how the Mufti will be able to justify. And he doesn't have jurisprudence precedents. So the ruling of those on the genetic intervention is based on their conception of two issues. The one is the nature of this genetic technology and its impact, and their own knowledge and ability of understanding the jurisprudence knowledge, so that they can envision this issue and build a ruling based on the precedent. They only found two gateways in addition to resorting to the general text dealing with changing the khalq of Allah. The first one is for treatment or healing. The second one is interest. Interest is something that is fluid, because there is no criterion through which we can determine based on what we determine the interests. Especially in a complex issue such as the modern technologies that we don't understand their implications, and they are in progress, endless. They don't stop anywhere. We don't know where they will end. That's why the Mufti is always concerned and afraid. He's afraid for the organization of jurisprudence to have a discrepancy, because here we are speaking about the objectives of wilaya, and the father, will he be able to intervene or not, and when and how, and preserving life. So he is keen to preserve the jurisprudence heritage, and also he's afraid of this modern day technology, which he doesn't know where it will take us. That's why we find those conditions and limitations taken into consideration by the Mufti in his decrees. What we notice about the fatwas explained by Dr. Ghali is that I have three observations. The first one is that the discussions here do not tackle the religious dimension, because here we're speaking about altering the creation of Allah. So there is a dimension of aqidah or creed or faith. Here we're speaking about the freedom of mankind, and to what extent is he free? Can he or she intervene? And khalqullah, is it the creation of Allah and the deeds of Allah and the deeds of mankind, etc.? The second observation is viewing this technology, it's just a tool. I can use it in good or evil. And the Mufti comes and he says, if you use it in good, then fine. If you use it in something bad, then that's evil. So he will use it here, and the enhancement is the same thing. Why? Because he said it's an intervention in the nature of the creation of Allah and the alteration of the creation of Allah, and intruding on the dignity of mankind, as the Jeddah Council has indicated. So, looking at technology today, if you cannot take it partially, because you have to take the responsibility of taking on this decision, because the distance between the aims and the means, we cannot nowadays separate the impact of social media and their impacts and their technological aspect. So genetic technology nowadays, we do not realize until now the issue of geneticization, the psychological and social dimensions and biological dimensions, how far it will affect the human beings, and not only a person's decision about a child or even a physician's opinion. How can, or rather, the third observation, the gateways of jurisprudence to evaluate this deed of genetic intervention was either through interests and disinterests or healing, and those are two complex understandings or meanings.
لابد من مقاييس ومعايير.
There have to be a number of standards of criteria that should be objective and not based on personal inclinations or personal or individual fears or collective fears. We have to restrict the matter from a scientific perspective, and this does not exist. How are you going to decide about maslaha and mafsada, about benefit or interest and corruptings? There should be a number of things should be taken into account. What Mufti thinks is a mafsada or thinks is a maslaha, or what the father thinks, and that there should be a genetic kind of intervention that on the basis that this is going to be in the interest of the son or daughter. These are inclinations or partial matters. If there is a community that is more partial to white skin or white complexion or dark complexion or other kind of things that are much more preferred, and if we do that, this is going to be subject to cultural inclinations or cultural preferences in certain times or places. So this matter is far beyond intervention, and the Mufti does not look into this dimension and deals with the matter in a very partial or restrictive way. I would like to conclude by tackling the last theme: how can we come up with an ethical or moral position on the basis of expanded kind of ethics. This is what I dealt with in a chapter in a book in English. So such kind of morals is the one that tries to include four spheres or four realms: creed, علم الكلام, فقه, jurisprudence, the أصول الفقه, in order to find solution to this genetic matter. And this is going to help us to include human beings and their position in the universe within the discussion of genetic intervention, because this concept is outside the jurisprudential kind of discussion that Dr. Ghali talked about. Nobody tackled such matter and was not taken into account. Now, and this kind of methodology would enable us to include what is practical and what is theoretical, because there is a kind of relationship, intersection between the two. So we are dealing with a compounded kind of act or practice. We cannot rectify it far beyond the objectives and incentives or the human kind. If we open the door for intervention or interference, so some of it, if not all of it, some of it has to do with the human beings, because there is interference in the human being. And this would have an impact on offsprings, on coming generations. And in keeping with the concept of kalam, this is going to lead us to human acts and their relationship with the acts of God. With regard to the concept of the human being and human nature, we can differentiate between three concepts when it comes to human beings and human nature. We have the Greek conceptualization that has to do with soul and the different forces, and I'm not going to repeat that, I've already explained it. And consequently, if the Greek conceptualization entails that a nafs is the one that moves the human being, then all the alterations in the body, if they do not touch the soul, this does not lead to any problematics, because it is the soul and nafs. So this is only a mold. The body is only a mold. But can we decisively say that any alteration is not going to impact the soul? I do not know. I think it is going to impact in general. We might have some discussion about such a matter. The second point is the technical conceptualization, which is the genetic technology that has moved from the human being into the body, and the body becomes the center, and consequently centrality or the central role is no longer covered by the soul, but the body and the external capabilities of the body, which means that interference, if we, as per the Greek philosophy, we used to understand how the soul behaves and how we have the acts as per the soul. Now we deal with the body as the actor, and we try to change those acts through genes and not through at-takhalluq. And the third conceptualization about human beings and human nature is a concept beyond the technology, that human beings are far beyond compounds of genes. There are some other dimensions, such as spiritual and metaphysical kind of dimensions that have to do with the central relationship of human beings, his duties, and also the reason behind his existence, and so on and so forth, the things that I talked about before. And all these things have to do with the central question, are human beings, is a project that is complete, or is it a project that is in progress? Can it develop in keeping with the efforts exerted? And this is what was mentioned by Dr. Ghali. So the Quranic discourse, yes, does not show that externally, but issues to do with the human creation or God's creation, leads to so many questions that we might discuss, which is the relationship between what is material and what is moral, and the second question, what is manufactured and what is not manufactured, because this interference or intervention is going to make us as manufactured beings, because there is a certain will that decided at certain place, a certain time for this final product to see light, which is genetically modified. So this is the result of the control of one being over another being. The second being does not have a will. So who is going to protect and the rights of that second being? So we have this genetic intervention, which gives us the illusion that we are carrying out the job of law of God. So this kind of imperfecting the body is at the level of creation. We have to differentiate between two things. We all seek the will of God, but the will of God means two things. So there is the will of God when it has to do with the commands, which is a legislative kind of command, and the creation, the will of creation, is a creative kind of will. So the ability of God is absolute, but this does not deny the fact that there is a possibility of changing the creation of God. But this change or alteration, is it based on the will of creation or command? It is based on the creation. So we can change the creation of God. This has become a reality. But our discussion today is about this change. Does this change is in keeping with the will or legislative will of God? And this is the discussion that have been trying to carry out. Is this going to be in keeping with the legislative will of God or not? In my view, we can talk about the concept of the change of God's creation or the alteration of God's creation, which is to do with the change of human nature. And the restrictions is what makes human nature away from its constant attributes and also biological constant attributes. Anything outside this scope is not an alteration in human nature, and this has nothing to do with partial change. Any partial change when it comes to an organ in order to make it regain its duty, its function, this is not an issue. But when there is change that has to do with the personal constant attributes, then this is another story in terms of time and space and so on and so forth. And human nature is manifested in form and effectiveness or function. And now we can change form, but this would not have an impact on the function, or vice versa. any change, when we talk about change in human nature, and any change in form and function, this is not justified from a moral perspective. We're not going to say that this is a change in God's creation. This is a negative change which is based on personal inclinations, cultural inclinations that are diverse and might change from time to time or place to place. There is one community that would want this and another would want something else. Two parents would want to this and parents would want something else. So such choice of negative intervention is going to threaten the constant concept of human nature that is taken for granted. Although we are diverse in terms of form, capabilities, and so on and so forth, from China to Morocco, but we can talk about a constant form of human nature. So irrespective of this diversity, great diversity in terms of form and capabilities, if we subject this intervention into cultural and personal inclinations and preferences, this is going to be counterproductive and we're going to fall into so many problematics. I'm going to stop here and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
الآن نفتح المجال للأسئلة.
Like to open the floor for questions and answers if you have any questions that you would like to pose. I'd like to take 5 questions and then we go for a second round.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for this wonderful talk on this interesting topic. I had a question to Dr. Rashwani. Like when we were talking about the taghayyur and the tasakhur, so you mentioned that most of the classical scholars, they interpreted the Quranic verse in terms of like the alteration could be understood as change in faith because it was a practice of Arabi when like Jahiliyyah period. So I want to ask a question regarding an issue which is not serious as gene editing, but that's so innate to human nature, and it's not inherently changing the creation. I want to to know about this beauty enhancement. I mean, how do you place this enhancement, like your surgeries for breast augmentation and Botox implantation, in this debate? And I have a question to Dr. Ghali regarding the verse which says, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. So this taqweem is about composition. So I want to know if Allah is talking about the composition that's the perfect for human being, then why do we have babies with disabilities? And the second part of this question is related to this enhancement thing. Where do we find ayah in Quran about the enhancement? Because it's not, if we take this composition in a sense like we have a pair of hands, eyes and legs, which is perfect. But when we talk about enhancement, it's not going to change, like we're not going to have 3 hands or something. So how do we find, where do we find the references in Quran regarding this enhancement? Thank you.
Mike, please.
أصبح نادرا. خصوصا إلى الدكتور معتز رحمه الله على هذا الطرح الجميل. هل المنظور لهذا الموضوع هل هو منظور أخلاقي بحت ولا منظور فكري؟ هذا كل سؤال ممكن قديم حديث. هل الأخلاق أصبحت ضابطة في تحديد الحلال والحرام؟
The speaker is not using the mic. The interpreter is unable to hear the speaker.
وإذا كان مدخل فكري فيعني الموضوع خلص على الضرب والنفع وتنتهي النتيجة. فإلى أي حد دائما الأخلاق تستبعد دائما في مواضيع الاستنساخ ومواضيع الجينات، لكنها في الحقيقة لا تنعكس على موضوع الحلال والحرام في الفكر الإسلامي.
شكرا جزيلا. I know that some of you didn't get the translation because there was no mic here in the first front, but Dr. Mu'taz will repeat the question when he answers it. كان هنا تفضل.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for this invaluable presentation.
For the lecture that was in English by Dr. Muhammad Ghali, thankfully you have mentioned what is controversial and what is not. However, if in the case from, I want your opinion, not the Majma' al-Fiqh, I want your opinion for, let's suppose a couple who are married for, I don't know, 10, 20 years, and they can't have babies because of problem with the, like the cell of the egg, for example. And through mitochondrial manipulation, which you have alluded to somehow, they can, like take the cell of the, they can replace just the cell, not the genetic, sequencing of the gene of the woman or the man. It's only the cell for the egg. What is your opinion on the legality of this or not? If you say no, we cannot do that because it is haram, and you bring ayahs to prove your point, you are depriving those two or this couple from having children. And you'll say خلاص يهب الله لمن يشاء الذكور ويهب لمن يشاء الإناث ويجعل من يشاء عقيما. You have, as a scientist, you will be just working as a judge. This is the question. What is your opinion? For the other teacher that gave the lecture in Arabic, شكرا على محاضرتك. السؤال نفس السؤال الذي ذكره زميلي.
And here I'm speaking about in case there is somebody who was born deformed. You spoke about misuse or mismanagement. When this person does not accept his deformation and to say Allah created me as such, but I want to improve my image, I want to prove my body, psychologically he will be more comfortable. Why don't you let him do a plastic surgery? That's not a misuse of the technology that exists.
تفضل يا فندم.
My question is to Dr. Mu'taz. What can be the impact of this genetic intervention to the psychological health of the children and the parents? And could there be here the issue of subservience of the live people to the dead? And a question to all, where is the right to self-determination? Is it in the hands of the parents only? And what about the self-determination, ability and authority for the children? Peace be upon you all. Assalamu alaikum. May Allah bless you for this valuable lecture. I'll try to have a question to Dr. Ghalib and one to the last panelist. Dr. Ghali, why don't we behave, for example, if we want to raise the child to memorize the Quran, for example, why don't we teach him or try in the beginning to interact with the child with acts or behaviors that will enable him to have a strong memory and to memorize Quran well? And this is an option. Is the person having ownership of his body to act with it? For the last panelist, you said a question in the beginning. Your lecture was focusing on a group of things. Through the discussion, we can analyze it. how to deal with the contemporary technological changes. We have big challenges, and here to interact with those changing things, I see that we should have ijtihad so that Islam stays abreast with modern life. It seems that ijtihad now is shut off, but the challenges nowadays impose that we recall the ijtihad and to lessen its conditions. Now, for the problems and catastrophes, this is done through different stages. Here we can rely on analogy or qiyas, but this qiyas, if the origin is here, but when there is no origin, we rely on procedural measures to reach a ruling or provision through some kind of an ijtihad to fulfill the interest. And here we can resort to the objectives theory because we want to avert evil or harm rather than bringing about an interest. The Quranic provisions are justified, whether partially or entirely, and thus the opinion of Mu'tazilites is indeed the trumping one. And through extrapolation, we can maybe reach a conclusion. Here we are speaking about these issues in this way. Before that, any other questions now before I go to the panelists? Assalamu alaikum. We are glad to listen to all of you. I have a question to Dr. Mu'taz al-Din al-Khatib. He said in his lecture, we should take into account three dimensions for genetic intervention: the philosophical and the usul al-fiqh, jurisprudence fundamentals, and the theologian. Explain that. What's the difference between taghyir and taskhir? Every taskhir includes a change. When we made taskhir for the horses, we made changes. We made a special shoe for it that naturally it doesn't have. So in nature, in animals, mankind has changed a lot in nature and did not ask if this is part of the change of the creation of Allah, such as destroying mountains or making lakes. The issue here, or the question is, what are the limitations of taskhir or subservience? Or here I want to say that the body of the human being is subservient to mankind to do certain objectives, to achieve certain objectives. From a Quranic standpoint here, to clarify the Quranic approach to this issue, every taskhir makes a person goes against the monotheism, then it is a deviation from the objective. Under that also comes what has been said by the Prophet of Allah Salih to his tribe Thamud, which is something that was thought about by interpreters. Do you take therefore a path what is the problem with big buildings and skyscrapers in order to spread mischief? Ibn Ashur said the issue is relevant and dealing with the objectives of those human behaviors, those behaviors of man in changing nature. When the objectives of the people of Thamud is to boast and to build high skyscrapers and not for a legitimate Shari'i purpose, and the envisioning of linking civilization with the idea that this could lead to eternal life, which is contradictory with the Quranic understanding, because we as humans are of a certain lifespan that will end one day. That all clarifies to us the meaning of taskhir, or the limitations or confinements of taskhir allowed to mankind. That's all I can say, because the verses that we always use in the realm of our talk about what is changing in the creation of Allah and what is not an evidence to control this issue. We need further evidence. Maybe those other verses speaking about the purpose of taskhir and its confinements are keys to help us understand this issue and reaching justifications that are legitimate for them, and Allah knows best. For the questions I have, speaking about we have indeed created mankind in the best way, how can we understand this ayah in the realm of children who are born with deformities and anomalies? Here we are speaking about the original and mainstream, not the certain cases. Most interpreters link this to comparing mankind to animals, that he is walking on two while others walk on four. He is a two-legged creature and others are four-legged creatures. Also, the possibility that man is born in the best way, there is no contradiction, because there is a potential in mankind to improve himself. The wisdom behind those children or adolescents, I spoke about this in my book Islam and Disability, and I dealt with this issue in terms of theologians' opinions of the wisdom, the divine wisdom, vis-a-vis such people. The mitochondria question, part, or I'm afraid to give details and fall in a mistake because I'm not a scientist, but the question about the egg and the sperm when they are together or there's penetration, part, then we have the human being. But in this mitochondria, there is a part responsible for this energy which contains part of the DNA. The contemporary jurisprudence discourse, especially when speaking about cloning, the classical jurisprudence states that lineage is attributed to the bed. A man and a wife and a husband, they bring about a child, and if there is doubt, then they resort to the issue of cursing as a way to determine who the baby belongs to. Now here we are speaking about a nucleus to be removed from the egg. We put one that is human, consisting of 46 chromosomes. So we bring 23 chromosomes from the man, 23 from the female. Then we have 46. It goes to the womb. Then we have a human being. So we take a nucleus of a full cell, which is 46 chromosomes. So we don't need 23 from each. So we take an egg from the woman. We take the nucleus out of it. Then we put a nucleus of a fully grown one from a woman, which is 46 chromosomes. Then it's put in the womb, and thus we have a newborn. And this was the way of the Dolly sheep. Now, when we have infertility, here we are speaking about a bed. So what is the problem? Or marriage. The problem is that the husband has no role in this issue. Everything is coming from the wife. The husband is just watching. So how can he be a father for this newborn child? So they said not only that there should be marriage, but rather biological contribution for the genetic structure of the child, because we have sulb and tara'ib, contribution from the man, contribution from the woman, and the man should be married to the wife.
في النقاش. فإذا
And there's no third party. So if we take with this, then there's no mitochondria, nor any gene or part of the DNA could be added from outside the mainstream vision of the councils of fiqh. In the Shia vision, it's different. They say that the mother and the father should be married. Other than that, you can do anything you want. It could be volunteering the womb or the sperm or the egg, but the recipients should be married, and thus the child is born in bed, and this is different from the Sunni vision. For the right to self-determination or autonomy, in the Islamic vision or the secular one, autonomy is belonging to a person who is an adolescent and rational, mentally able. He or she can say yes or no. In Islam, before that, right, there is the command of Allah. If He commands something, we have to do, whether we accept it or not. If He forbids you, you should follow that as well and avert from doing it. If the person is unable to decide for lack of ration or not of age, here we are speaking about protection or a guardian. In the Islamic viewpoint, we have this guardianship. Some people say that it's conditioned by the benefit for the child directly. So otherwise there is no action. Even in contemporary laws, many Arab and Muslim countries said that volunteering organs from children is not allowed, even if we take the permission and consent of the guardian, because it will not benefit the child. It could benefit the recipient, but not the child himself. Some said as long as there is no harm. So according to the standpoint, if there is benefit or not, that will create arguments. So the father cannot decide everything, especially if there is no clear benefit.
With regard to the education of children, teaching them the Quran and so on and so forth, and deciding upon these things. So this has to do with a taklif, the concept of taklif in Islam, which is the concept of tasking. And there are a number of expressions such as al-mujahada, jurisprudential expressions, mujahadat al-nafs, And some talk about this alteration, which is tahsin, to be able to learn a language without having to go to school, learning the Quran without having to exert effort. And here the idea of taklif becomes redundant. Some others say no. We try to take al-mujahada, which is struggle, strife, from a personal kind of scale into another scale. So there is another person who is struggling, who is doing efforts, who has allowed this technique. And we do not lose this struggle or this mujahada. Even the person who wants to do that for himself or herself should be tired, should do his best, her best, for him to get what is required. So the matter does not end, and this is a different kind of way of looking at it. So far away from the concepts of secularism, some modern philosophers say that this is a matter of time before we see the end of these schools and places of education, and persons would resort to these alterations or genetic alterations or changes on the kind of enhancement or embellishment level. These are only things that have to do with theories. There are things to do with the enhancement of human memory, but to come up with a genetic kind of enhancement that would make a child very naughty or nice and lucid and so on and so forth, this is not yet seen. It is only a matter of philosophical concepts.
السؤال الأول حول الموضوع.
For the first question given, is this something ethical or fiqhi? Fiqhi is part of it, so ethics are wider than jurisprudence, and akhlaq and fiqh are intertwined. Akhlaq or manners are not isolated from jurisprudence. This is an important point. So here we are speaking about a theory in evaluating the deeds, and that is morals and ethics. And ethics are now very complex. The simplistic jurisprudence judgment does not explain the ethical dimension. So fiqh is fundamental and intrinsic, but it's not sufficient. We need to get other concepts. And I spoke about the good deed and not the halal and haram. That's why I said, how can we justify it morally? And searching for the objective of Allah is complex based on that. That's why I have included 4 concepts and not 3. Fiqh, usul and kalam, and falsafa. In this paradigm, there are other examples which will have other concepts. Of course, here the medical concept exists, so I didn't mention it because we're looking into something of a medical nature. For the second question, I think the one who asked has left, but enhancement, here we're speaking about an intervention for treatment and not for cosmetics. Enhancing the memory if it's weak or increasing its ability doesn't change the human nature based on the concept I explained. I said that the enhancement intervention is the one that changes the human nature and our visions of it. So I said this enhancement intervention is the one that changes the shape and function, the form and function. Now, there is a treatment or medical intervention which is an attempt to restore what is an abnormal to normal. Any deformity is abnormal because nature, we view it not in terms of what's in individuals, but rather the genre or the species. So this preventive one is to prevent what could lead to something that is outside the norms of stable nature which is in the human norm in terms of place and time. In China, nature is different from here. That's why I said in terms of time, place, and age. 71-year-old person cannot do something to be going back to being 20 years of age. So anything that changes the form and the function has to be taken into three elements, which is time and age and place. For the third question, the impact of genetic intervention and its psychological impact. I'm not a specialist, I cannot answer this. Now, the other question is that the authority of parents on the genetic intervention for an expected boy in terms of enhancement, not treatment. For the treatment is justified ethically to restore the boy who is about to come or who came to his nature or assumed nature. Contrary, it is actually ethically incumbent on the parents to intervene to restore the child to his or her assumed nature. And in terms of controlling the child to change the nature, this is dealing with the species and not the individuals. This is hegemony that's unjustified over future generations because they do not exist until now. So how can I have the authority to control the future of generations who are not here yet? So this will create a dysfunction of the free will and the ethical responsibility, because we are speaking about people who do not exist yet, and then they might come and object to what we have done to them. And the philosophical dimension question here, this intertwined with the first question. The philosophical dimension is important. Why? Because here we're speaking about justification and evidence, and ethics are part and parcel of the evidence, the moral evidence. That is why this deed is good or evil, and how did you know if it's good or evil? In the justification and providing evidence that this deed is good or evil, and using the references to this justification morally, we need philosophy here, definitely. And the philosophical one is wider than the jurist one.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your attendance, and we're looking forward to seeing you in other events and lectures in our College of Islamic Studies and Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics. Thank you so much.